Dude, can you clean out the sink when you're done?
Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 47 of the iPhreaks show. This week on our panel we have Ben Sherman.
Hello from warm and nice weather Houston.
Andrew Madsen.
Hi from Salt Lake City.
James Zuber.
I just flew in from the Gulf Coast of Florida, and boy are my arms tired.
Pete Hodgson.
Terrible.
Terrible. Hello from sunny Berkeley.
I'm Charles Max Wood from DevChat.tv, and this week we have a few special guests. We have Brianna Wu.
What's crack-a-lackin'?
Amanda Warner.
Hey, how's it going?
And Maria Enderton.
Hi. I can't seem to find a good mic, so sorry if I'm soft.
That's okay. We'll forgive you. So, we brought you on this week to talk about game development, and the tools that I have listed here are Maya and UDK.
Sure.
So, why don't you guys introduce yourselves really quickly, and then we'll jump in and talk about game development. Brianna, do you want to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. My name is Brianna Wu. I am the head of development at Giant Spacekat. We create cinematic experiences using the Unreal Engine. Unreal, as you may know, is the same engine we use for Mass Effect, Deus Ex, Batman, Arkham Asylum, any number of professional console quality 3D games. It was actually it started in the late 90s, actually. And what's happened over the years is it's become an extremely popular development tool. So, we started it started out there, and now we're actually moving into the fourth version of the engine. And one of the really exciting things that's happened along the way is, Unreal back in, I think it was 2009, 2010, could really see the writing on the wall, how we were, gaming was going to be moving more and more towards mobile devices, meaning, iPads, iPhones, things like that. So they ported their engine over to iOS. And so that's basically what we work with. And it's extremely exciting. It is, I think it's fair to say it is the most powerful 3D engine that exists on that platform.
I have to say that when you said you create cinematic experiences with a game engine, it reminded me of those YouTube videos where two guys are swearing at each other on World of Warcraft or something.
And it's being read by thematic actors.
That's right. Or some terrible voice engine, right?
No, it was actually, when I was coming of age and, learning to do this, one of my very favorite games was Parasite Eve on the PlayStation 1. And, they build that as, the cinematic RPG. It was, full motion video. And you look back at it today and it's beyond dated. But, when we started our company, that was always a game that was really in my mind because if you look at a lot of games on iPhone, they tend to be these sprite-based, in-app purchase, very forgettable, ephemeral experiences. And what Amanda, Maria, and I really have worked for years to bring to fruition is this game that tells a story, this game that lets you meet characters and identify with them and feel emotion for them. So that's really, what drives us every day.
Cool. Well, let's have Amanda and Maria introduce themselves. Amanda, do you want to go next?
Sure. My name's Amanda Stenquist Warner. And I'm the co-founder and animator on the project. And I I exclusively use Maya to do all the animation. And then we port it into UDK, and then, Bree and Maria hit a make game button and make it work.
Well, you make it sound like you do all the work.
I do. Those two layabouts do nothing, and I'm carrying the company all on my own. It's
really true. It's
tragic.
Yeah, they click the make game button and the make sales button, right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's how gaming works, right?
Totally.
I played a lot of Game Dev Story, that simulation game, so I consider myself an expert on this topic.
Well, great. Now you can give us a few tips over the course of this podcast. That would be very
Just
helpful.
Level up to hacker mode.
Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
Did you get the pirated version where you started losing all your money?
That was hilarious.
That was genius. That was, oh my God. I just fell down.
Was this the same game or was it a different game simulator? Game dev simulator.
That was it.
Game dev story?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was pretty awesome.
Yep. All right, Maria, do you want to introduce yourself before we get... It seems like we keep going off on tangents here.
Sure, that's fine. I'll try to talk louder. I'm not the most loudest person in the world, but I'm Maria Enderton, and I'm the programmer on the project, but I started the project doing more of the technical art, so character rigging, working in Maya, and I still do that, as well as the programming and miscellaneous troubleshooting in various programs.
Effects, lighting.
Panic button. Yeah.
She very much is our panic button.
It's so true. It's so true. When we don't know what we're doing, we call Maria, and she makes it all better.
Every project needs one of those.
Yeah.
So I have a question about the UDK. When I think of Unreal, I think of like the big, AAA titles and that are using it. I never really thought of it as like an indie or a small shop platform to develop games on. So what makes it approachable to smaller teams?
I don't think it is if you don't have a Maria on staff. It's been very challenging for us. A lot of the things in our game we've had to completely figure out by ourselves. It is accurate and fair to say that most teams working with Unreal are much larger than we are. We're a team of primarily 5 people. So, Maria, do you want to speak a little bit to that and some of the challenges that you found?
I mean, in terms of 3D engines, I haven't tried Unity, but I've heard it's much more user-friendly to get started. At the same time, Unreal is very powerful. So, I mean, that was a big selling point, graphically good. I mean, the game most people know that is with Unreal would be Infinity Blade, which is made by Chair. And yeah, I mean, it's been a hard transition trying to figure out things as we go because the documentation, the engine changes so much that documentation isn't always up to date, or there's less people using mobile, so there's less of a community. Like in Boston, where we are, there's actually a Unity meetup community, but there's no such thing for Unreal to kind of talk to other people about.
Yeah, it's a real challenge for us on a daily basis. I do want to say Epic has been just a fantastic ally for us. And, they're very interested in teams like ours, using this engine that they've spent, money and resources developing. So, it's certainly doable. And, if anyone out there is interested in developing with this, and you have questions, like, feel free to email me. Like, we're always looking for allies to, develop with this engine.
So do you think you could, maybe talk about what the engine provides to you? I think most people are kind of familiar with the idea of 2D engines. You get you have textures and you make sprites and you can sort of move them around the screen and animate them. What types of facilities does Unreal give you?
Well, how technical can I get here? If you're working with 3D, I think it's fair to say if you go out there and look at the best looking Unity game, and then you look at the best looking Unreal game, I think it's fair and accurate to say that Unreal game is going to look better. And, there are many reasons for that. Generally speaking, the Unreal Engine kind of gets a little closer to the metal. So, it can render more polygons and vertices, the kinds of maps that you can use, spec maps, normal maps, color maps, diffuse maps, emissive maps. It's extensive. But for us, the reason for our game that made, Unreal really attractive for what I do and what Amanda does is this one tool within it called Matinee. Matinee is a subset of Kismet, which is this visual scripting language within it. But, when you look at the history of games becoming more cinematic and games being able to tell more stories, you can really look back to, the first Unreal in the 90s and this language that came from it. And what it allows us to do is to have this really sophisticated cinematic scripting language. So if Amanda wants to animate a scene with, our main character Holiday holding a gun on someone and they have this really tense 24-like showdown, we have access to this fantastic tool that lets us, tweak animation sets, lets us tweak which characters where at what time. It lets us tweak maps and materials that are used. It lets us tweak sound cues. So for us, what makes Unreal the most attractive engine for our game type are these powerful cinematic tools.
I'm just looking at the documentation for Matinee, and I think my favorite feature is enable gore in editor preview.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's some of the functions don't exist for for the mobile version. I don't know if that exists for us. That's a question for Maria.
And I mean, the other thing that's been beneficial is Matinee is part of this larger Kismet visual scripting system. Out of the box, I mean, you can do a lot with Kismet, but there is a limit. But what the scripting language, Unreal Script, lets me do is build custom nodes. So if we want to do a certain kind of interaction, I can build a custom node that kind of hides behind the scenes what's going on, but then Brianna can use it in Kismet, which has also been very powerful because, there is a limit to how much you can do with visual scripting alone without adding code, but they let me build Kismet nodes that help that out.
So at what point do you, like in Maya, you can design your 3D meshes and textures and do like skeletal animation, correct?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so at what point do you take that, like the animations you've done in Maya, and at what point does this Matinee tool, like if you're like walking and you have to like jump over a puddle, do you like define the walking states and the jumping states in Maya and then you sort of tie them all together?
Well, Amanda, why don't you talk about your end of that, and then I will talk about implementing it.
Well, so our game isn't very cyclical. There are cycle animations that we have for like the combat engine, but most everything else is cinematic. So I'm responsible for making everything happen in world space, location-wise and timing-wise, and everything is really all laid out in Maya first. And then once we get it to a point where we like it, I mean, I'm constantly showing everybody play blasts of everything that I'm doing. And once it's to a point where we like it, I then export it out with the FBX plugin, and that's what is translated into Unreal, and that's what Bree takes and assembles. So that's everybody. That's like the player characters, whatever tools they're using. That's the cameras. That's me loading up the sound cues so that everything, the vocals, and then somebody else goes in and adds sound effects and everything in Kismet. So that's my end of it.
And then Amanda will pass it off, to my end. Have you guys played Mass Effect by chance? How many of you guys have played Mass Effect?
I played the first one for not very long. I don't have a lot of time to play like in-depth games, and so when I find one that like looks like it's going to suck all my time away, I try to
avoid it.
Run away.
Right. So the thing Mass Effect is, I'm sure your listeners are familiar with it, but the thing Mass Effect is really known for is this Paragon Renegade system, right? Like your Commander Shepard can be rogue, or they can kind of be, a good guy or a good girl. And so what happens is Amanda goes through and creates all these wonderful scenes that are just bursting with life. If you look at our animation, the characters just seem so believable. And what she'll do is she'll go through and animate variants of the scene. Like maybe Holiday succeeds in jumping across a gap. Maybe she fails. And then what I do is I take these anim sets that she exports through FBX, and Maria's created all these wonderful logic nodes for me. So, I go through there and I'll implement them. So, if you're playing a Holiday that for our game is professional, one set of events will play. If you're playing a version of Holiday who is more rogue, who's more Jack Bauer-like, it will go through a different set of events. And on top of that, I do the materials, meaning the textures and things that make the world really pop from the geometry. And I also did the sound design. For a game like ours that's so cinematic, in doing this job, it's really amazed me how critical the sound design is. And I spend an immense amount of time picking the right music, picking the right sound effects, working with the sound to really have them add up to this emotional experience.
So what, like you're talking about with jumping over puddles and all that, we're not really a game where you can freeform walk around where a lot of those kind of more cyclical things are happening. The only part where we really only use cyclical or shorter animations is in the combat engine. And even there, we're relatively simplified in relation to a lot of combat engines, in part just because the particular style of combat we wanted, partly because we're a small team, there's limits. So Amanda, will make a front, move to the left animation, move to the right animation, move forward, move left, shoot and various stuff. And in that case, she's exported it, and it's mostly been me dealing with how to blend them together appropriately during combat.
So maybe I'm not completely understanding. So some of these things are cyclical, like walking around and stuff. But when you're talking about cinematic, I'm not even sure, approach, I guess, are you basically saying that you can't use those cyclical types of animations because the camera angle may be different, or the way that you're viewing things are going to be different? So it'll render differently, pretty much, differently in different circumstances because you're not using the same
I think
animation?
if we were designing Mario, it's pretty clear you've got like a walking state, a running state, and a jumping state, right?
Yeah.
Correct.
So it's like easy, like a given player input, you can like switch between those states. And from what I understood is that while you have those like general concepts, you're like piecing them together like per scene.
Exactly.
Yeah, Amanda, this is your department. Why don't you speak to this a bit?
I mean, we have quite a few joints in the facial rig, mainly so that we can lip sync. It's not procedural. Like, sometimes if you watch a game, the mouth and the face is kind of dead because they're just blah, 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 blah. And it's the program taking sound bites and maybe, trying to lip sync to that rather than having an animator go through and hand key it.
That was exactly the first Deus Ex for me. Like, I hated that part of that game because their mouth just made like an open triangle when they were trying to talk.
It's like Final Fantasy too. It's I just bought Lightning Returns, and I was really shocked by how much this issue matters because when Amanda will animate something, you'll feel so much more life in their faces and their expressions, and Lightning just feels dead through the whole game to me.
Well, I mean, I was going through and playing Bioshock Infinite, and I mean, don't get me wrong, I loved that game. Like, ask anybody on my team, I can't stop talking about that stupid game. But even then, sometimes Elizabeth, the facial animation just wasn't there, and I'm watching it, I'm like, all right, I'm really going to cut myself more of a break now. But yeah, I mean, everything is. I've basically animated a feature-length movie by myself. And that's kind of the approach to it. It's not something the program could do for me and have it come out the way we would want it. So, it was something that we did by hand through many iterations, and yeah. It's just we had an effect in mind, and that's the best way for us to go through and do it.
It sounds like a lot of what you're describing is essentially you're halfway towards building an animated movie as much as you are a game, because a lot of this, I mean, I guess cinematic is the clue there, right?
Yeah.
So how much does I guess the techniques are different in terms of what stuff you do by hand versus what stuff you do procedurally. But it sounds like the tooling is kind of the same. Like if I was going to make a more procedural, run around and jump up and down things and hit people with a hammer or whatever, is it the same tools but just used in a different way, or would I need totally different tools?
No. I mean, you'd still be using the same controls and everything. Most everything that you did would be at origin. So it's not like it would be running all over the map. You would do it in one single spot, a run cycle, a jump cycle, that sort of thing. And then that gets taken into, the best example I have is with Unity. The studio I was working at prior to this, we were making a game called Robot Rising. And, you take the little jump animations and then you assign, which key does what when. But it very much is the same idea, same bones, same rigs, everything. It's just a difference of where it gets exported and what the program is going to interpolate for you versus already saying, this is where this is happening.
I mean, in terms of the Maya side, it's the same. If for something that's running around and shooting, then that's basically more engine controlled, and so that'd be more the programmer dealing with. In the case of us, it's basically mini movies split up by combat. So because we're mini movies, it's more on the movie side is more the matinee side, and it's very controlled what's happening, as opposed to if you're running around and jumping, you have to have user input, and so you end up having more programming involvement with it, as opposed to our mini movies, which has, other than some logic in it, has very little programming involvement with it.
Gotcha. So Matinee is the thing that lets you take these little building blocks that you've built in Maya and then kind of sew them together into a scene.
Yeah, it's fantastic. We love it. So, and again, that's why we chose to use Unreal as opposed to Unity. Unreal license is very expensive. If you want, the full version of it to publish on, PC and iOS, that's going to cost you $50,000. So, these are non-trivial costs. I forget how much a Unity license is. So don't take this as gospel, but as I remember it, it's like $1,000, $1,500,
Yeah, it's considerably
something like
cheaper.
that. Yeah, it's much cheaper.
And they have a free version.
Yeah, exactly.
So if we could get maybe into the programming side of it, I assume you're using C++?
So no, because we started with UDK, it has two layers. So the whole engine is built in C++, but the gameplay scripting language is called Unreal Script, which has a lot of similarities to C++, and how it's run. So there's crossover, but that's primarily what I've been using, which handles the gameplay aspects of it.
Like, what is it similar to?
It's similar to C++. It's object-oriented. It's classes. It's got a lot of similar syntax as well. And they also come, it's not that you're starting from scratch either. The game already has, a couple thousand Unreal Script files that's kind of laid out either to use as examples or to build up on, that I've built up on depending on what we need. Like in some places, they have weapon classes there already, but they were way more powerful and had way too much stuff compared to what we needed for our relatively simple combat. So in that case, I would look at theirs and kind of, maybe get advice from it, but I rebuilt it. But in other cases, like how rigs work, I just directly built off of that and already used the functionality they had.
Yeah, one of the things that really worries us at, at Giant Spacekat is, our game Revolution 60 is made with Unreal 3. Which was, it was what was out when we started this project. In the meantime, U4 has come out and they've deprecated Unreal Script. They've moved entirely over to, C++. So we have no idea if Epic is going to move over to, their mobile engine basically to Unreal 4. You have to assume they will at some point. So, what we're really worried about is when we get around to our sequel, this year, are we going to have to redo all these functions that Maria has made? So we're really worried about that.
Yeah, that sounds like it'd be really frustrating to have them deprecate the entire language.
Exactly.
Well, and since they're deprecating it, does that mean, that part of their ability to have UDK, this free version for people to try and start with, was the fact that they could split up the C++ and Unreal Script and only give you access to Unreal Script. If it's all C++, is there even going to be a free version anymore for those people who, got a chance to use it? I don't know.
So is that the main difference between the UDK and Unreal and the full Unreal Engine, is just the ability to drop down to C++?
Yeah.
That's the main feature, yeah. There's also the revenue share, like I said. There's also support from Epic. When you pay for a full license, you can, talk to Epic, post in their forums. Obviously they treat you more seriously if you've written them a giant check versus, using the free version of their game. So,
sure.
There are many benefits, but, for us, the biggest one is being able to, keep more of our money, obviously. So,
I'm curious to know a little bit about the development tools. I know you've talked a little about some of the tools that are included in the development kit, but is there an IDE you use? What does that run on? What does it look like?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about. If you're talking about putting together all the content or even the matinees, that's using their provided Unreal Editor, which is, I presumably similar to a Unity editor. It lets you make the maps, it lets you place objects in the 3D. If you're using the full engine, it's required to use Visual Studio, but for me, for Unreal Script. I've tried a few different ones that were custom for Unreal Script, which I didn't like, and I went back to fairly basic, just highlighter text editor that has worked the best for me. I'm sure if you're using source code, using Visual Studio is much preferable, but for my purposes, this text editor has worked the best.
Okay, yeah, I did a little looking myself. It seems like there are a lot of third-party Unreal Script IDEs, but I couldn't tell how good any of them were.
And I tried most of them, and, they're right, but they didn't really provide anything above what I could get in something else that worked just as well for me.
Is there a big ecosystem of kind of community stuff outside of the stuff that kind of is official Unreal Engine stuff? Is there tools and libraries and things like that, or is it basically just what the company provides is what everyone uses?
I mean, if you're talking about like, what you download with UDK and install, and if you can add stuff to that. My assumption is with source code, you can really get into trying to add more elements of your own, but for us, it's pretty much the tools that they've provided with thus far.
Okay.
I mean, I could talk about the asset creation side. I mean, we could certainly, try to make our entire game using BSP brushes or something like that. But what, we've gone through and done in Revolution 60 is every single level that you're in, we had a modeler go through, create that static mesh, and actually create that environment. So, if you're talking about the tools in our pipeline on the asset creation side, it's there's a massive list of them. Our characters were taken through a ZBrush pass, to kind of paint them and get their costumes correct. The models and static meshes you see inside the game, they're modeled using a NURB-based program called Inventor Fusion. We took them through a retopology pass. We brought them into Maya. We viewed them with a tool named Hedis UV layout, which allowed us kind of chop them up like you might chop up a world map and flatten it. We create our textures using Photoshop. We'll sometimes create normal maps using Crazy Bump. I mean, there's an entire litany of tools we use along the way. Sound editing, we use plugins. One plugin we use for Maya to help with the retopology pipeline is called Next, because it helps us select coplanar segments of vertices. So, if you're there, I guess my message here is there's a entire litany of tools that you have to do to produce a game of this quality.
Yeah, it sounds
well,
like.
I guess maybe I misunderstood the question. I thought you meant tools that were like integrated plug-in as part of Unreal, as opposed to, there are a huge amount of programs we use and eventually export products, but they're not like directly integrated into Unreal itself.
Gotcha. Yeah, I guess I was just interested in all of it. I'm not. I don't have a game development background, so it's all interesting to me. It sounds super expensive. Like most of those tools sound like they're not open source or free tools.
Yeah. Maya, we used the 2011 version of Maya. You wanted to go buy that back in 2011. That was $4,000. And then the next year, Maya 2012 came out, and we said, hey, let's look at going and upgrading to this. And we talked to Autodesk, and they said, sure, we'll give you upgrade pricing for this. We'll knock 10% off of $4,000. So, you are
wow.
definitely talking about tools.
It's very kind of them.
As an
Isn't
engineer,
I've heard 2011 was a great vintage.
Non-trivial.
It was a very good vintage. We're very comfortable with it.
Yeah.
I have to say though, like a lot of the programs now, I think have realized that they're almost unattainable and are offering subscription services. Like Adobe put out Creative Cloud, where you can get access to everything, like every program that they offer. And the latest versions of it for $50 a month, or, if you're new to the service, I think it's like $30. So I definitely think that they're trying to be more accessible, but there is something to be said for just having the license and not having to worry about it.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like, it kind of feels like the theme for a lot of this is there's the entry level stuff like Unity, which is a little bit cheaper, but not as powerful. But if you really want to kind of do it seriously, then you have to be willing to sink some cash into some tools.
Yeah, pay people, tools, licenses, marketing. These are expensive things. My background is a developer. I do development work in the trenches with my team every single day. But prior to this, one of the jobs I had was fundraising in politics, which has turned out to be an excellent background for someone running a game development studio. So. I know so many indie game developers here in Boston that do like those free tools. They like Unity, they like Blender. But, if you look at the product that we're trying to bring to market, I think the work speaks for itself. You can look at our trailer and, you can decide for yourself if those tools are worth the added cost.
That actually, I was going to ask you, if you don't mind talking about it, how have you approached putting the team together, getting funding to do development? Because I take it you haven't released yet, is that right?
That's correct. It's coming out, and we're working with our publisher on that right now. It could be 2 months. It could be 3 months. We're trying to get the thumbs up on that. I generally don't like talking about the nitty gritty of how we've funded the game to outside people. I can say that we started Rev 60 with basically assembling a minimally viable product, an MVP, and took it from there and got additional funding. So.
Did you guys on the team know each other before started this, or was this something you assembled?
I met Amanda on Craigslist, where all great professional relationships start.
Yeah, for like a completely different project.
Yeah.
Like I was originally coming on to help her husband with some work and do some side work with Bree, working on like a top-down turn-based strategy game. And we, Infinity Blade came out with Unreal, and we like, hey, wait a minute, we can do this. My eyes kind of bugged out when she suggested it, but yeah, I started working with her full time, and I had gone to school with Maria. So when it came time that we needed a programmer, I was like, I just so happen to know somebody, and we brought Maria on full time. That's kind of how we all got started.
Yeah, we call ourselves Team BAM, Brianna, Amanda, and Maria. So.
So I've got a random question, which is because I have a background in this. My first job professionally was doing C++ for a motion capture company. So, like the thing where you stick the ping pong balls on people's. How do you guys do the animation for kind of people walking around and stuff? Is that done by hand, or are you capturing motion? Are you using motion capture, or how does that work?
No, I do it all by hand. When I hear motion capture, I kind of go boo hiss.
Let's talk more about that.
No, I mean, I think you've probably seen it out there where motion capture can kind of venture into Uncanny Valley.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like Polar Express, for example. But there are also times where it's done really, really well. So like anything, I kind of want to treat it as a tool. Like the biggest thing for me, if we do motion capture for Rev 62, which I'm becoming more and more on board with, doing it by hand sucks. But, if it's a setup where it's something that I can then take that information and manipulate it how it should look, I'm more on board with that. Like, I don't want it to be the be all and end all, because I think you definitely lose some of it in the translation. Like, the hand movements won't be quite right. Like, anytime you do animation, you really almost have to have it be over exaggerated in order to sell it. But there are certain things that motion capture will do well. Like, somebody scratches their face. Like, that's a fun little tick that wasn't there before, So it really is just a matter of using it as a tool and not the exclusive way to go. I think that's when it's most successful.
Yeah, we live here in Boston with Harmonix. Harmonix did Dance Central and Rock Band, obviously, and we've certainly they actually built an entire mocap studio for it. So we've certainly considered approaching Harmonix and say, like, can we basically pay you to use your mocap studio and you basically hire actors to do our game. But I think for us primarily as technology people, I think there's a real tendency to kind of want to throw away the past and find a technological solution. Like for instance, right now there's a lot of, I was listening to a podcast this last week that's talking about if we're going to, stay with Objective-C, or if there aren't, if Apple needs to be developing a new language. And, I think we kind of want to, kind of throw out things automatically and move forward. And for me coming into this project, I was very much like, hey, let's just mocap this. Let's come up with a technological solution for it. But, since working with Amanda and, becoming more and more familiar with, the techniques and approaches of animation, she's really sold me that you can get a better product in many ways through doing it by hand. So, for Rev 62, we might go through and try to do some of our combat work, with mocap. But, as far as cinematics and, scenes where you really need emotion, I'm a big believer in doing that by hand. Just one more last thing. If you look at the most popular iOS game using the Unreal Engine, it's without a doubt Infinity Blade. Cyrus in Infinity Blade has 22 mesh influencing bones. Holiday, our main character in Rev 60, Maria, correct me if I'm wrong here, but isn't it 78 mesh influencing bones? So we've
somewhere around there.
we've given Amanda this vast array of tools and controls that she can use to really tell a story.
I definitely agree that you can't just take kind of motion capture and throw it into the game and you're done with it.
Right.
It kind of feels like though that there's that middle ground. I was thinking about this earlier when you were talking about the lip syncing, right? And it looks really silly if you just let the computer do it, but presumably doing it all by hand is a real pain. Like it seems like there must be some middle ground where you can have kind of the computer do the first pass and then you kind of like fix all of the stupid mistakes it makes. But maybe that ends up taking longer than just doing it from scratch yourself.
It can. It really can. I mean, we haven't come across yet a product where, we were actually approached by somebody with like a mocap suit. And the way he was describing it basically bakes the keys, into the file. So every single frame has a key on like every single control. So you end up with like this massive amounts of information, and trying to go in and alter that is kind of a really big pain in the butt. I mean, there was an MMO I was working on and we had cloth simulation, and it would do that same thing where it would bake a key on, every single frame. And if you need to go in and tweak something, you had to kill so much information. And there were a few times where we just ended up like destroying it and starting over. So it can be a double-edged sword. It can save you some time, but it can also take just as much time. And really, like, lip syncing is such a small portion of what I do. Like, I find that actually goes the fastest. Lining up the words and everything. It's more getting like the facial animation and like the head tilt, and it's a lot of me sitting in front of my computer making weird mouth gestures and hoping nobody can see me.
I can imagine as well if you in both extremes there's a risk of losing the kind of the artistry. Like, I mean, I kind of guess that if you're just using motion, like stuff that comes from reality, like motion capture, then you don't get to have like the otherworldly, like you want this stuff to be larger than life, I suppose. But then at the same time, if you're just doing it all by hand, then you miss all of those little human motions that you don't really think about, like the scratching the nose and all the rest of it.
Sure. You can. You definitely do. I mean, I was geeking out watching Frozen, the latest Disney animated movie, because they do get all those little ticky motion things. But I mean, that's also a team of like 700 animators, and, one person gets a scene for the duration of production.
Yeah, there was a really great session at WWDC where a guy from Pixar, he was using a Mac Pro. Unknowingly, he just had it was in sort of a nondescript outer box, but he plugged in a monitor cable and a keyboard and a mouse, and he did a little, brushwork on Monster University.
I saw that.
It was pretty awesome.
Yeah, it was very impressive.
So I have a question about cinematic games in general. There's definitely like a spectrum of like how much interactivity you allow in a game and how much is just like you sit and watch a movie. And on one extreme, you have something like I think it was Metal Gear Solid 2 for PlayStation 2, where I felt like every time I turned a corner, I was watching another movie.
Yeah,
and then you beat the game, and then you get into the first ending, and then the second ending, and then the third ending, and you're like, oh my goodness, I actually have to leave to go to work. But this ending is like an hour long. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have like, Mario Brothers, where it's like you're playing the entire thing. Where do you guys fall along that spectrum, and what do you think the sweet spot is for your game?
Yeah, we take a data-driven approach to that. With our original version of Rev 60, we presented it at PAX East last year. And, keep in mind, PAX East is primarily super hardcore gamers, right? Like, we're right across the booth from some FPS equipment that's being sold. And what we got over and over are people going, this game is too slow. This game is too slow. So we went back, and Maria actually calculated how long every single event was in the entire game. And we created a rule that, except for, extreme cases like the ending, for instance, you must interact with the game every 10, 20, 30 seconds.
No more
so
than
you
30.
Yeah, exactly. So you feel like you're really connected to the experience. I personally love Metal Gear. That's one of the games that really got me interested in doing cinematic stories. But I would also say that, there is a consensus with gamers out there that, QTEs are awful. QTEs are bad. QTEs are a terrible game type. And what we've really discovered and what our data shows over and over and over, that players discover playing our game is it's one thing to push X on a PlayStation controller, right? It's one thing to push up on a keyboard. But when you are using an iPad or an iPhone, with that touch interface, the same thing that makes using Safari feel like such a more intimate, close experience, it makes QTEs what we call action events. It makes them much more fun to do because you feel connected to it. If you slide, you have something to the right in combat, and then you see Holiday deliver this powerful cinematic kick to our opponent. It makes you feel really connected to the experience. So, that downfall for the cinematic game type is something that's, it's been on our mind for literally every day of production. But, it's my opinion, which is a very biased opinion, but it's my opinion we've really managed to, work and avoid some of those obvious, pitfalls.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's like an order of magnitude more intimate experience.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So I've got one more question that I want to ask, and that's just the story. How do you come up with a good story for the game?
So, the script is credited to both Amanda and I. So I wrote the first version of the script. And for me, my original conception for the script of Revolution 60 was 24. I'm the world's biggest 24 fan. I think it's a fantastically written show. And the reason I think it's a good show is they really excel at bringing two characters together and really explaining what their motivations are and letting you get to know them as people who are both flawed people and good people. Like Jack Bauer, the hero, I think anyone would admit he's a very flawed, angry character that can take things too far. So my original version with that was to basically, there was this character in 24 season 7. Her name was Renee Walker, and she was basically, people, fans of the show called her She-Jack. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to create Holiday as kind of based off of her personality. So the script of Revolution 60 is you have this orbital weapons platform. It's set in the future. You have this orbital weapons platform that's gone adrift over China. And you have these American special forces that basically go up to the space station and see why this has gone, adrift. So we set up this script, and my first version of it was very humorless, very dry. And, this is where Amanda really changed the tone of the project. Amanda's a huge fan of Buffy. And she kept saying, more humor, more sarcasm. Let's amp up the humor. Let's tell a joke. Jack Bauer never tells any joke in that entire series. So what we've ended up with is, it's a very intense game. It's a dark game. We're going to end up rating our game, 12 and above for a reason. If you have very young children, they probably should not play our game. But we're always looking for the humor in these moments. And, that's kind of the approach. Amanda, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, just that I basically subscribe to the Whedon-ism of, kill everybody, but tell a joke. For God's sakes, tell a joke. There were moments, and some of it is just part of my personality, and I think it comes through a lot with the animation. How would I react in this situation? So, like, a lot of Holiday's facial reactions, like her takes, are pretty much me. They're just me.
See, I think of you as more Amelia than anybody. So.
Oh yeah, wicked sarcastic.
Yeah.
I was watching one of the videos, and one of the characters opened up, and she said she was just fresh out of rehab again.
Oh gosh, Amanda Wynn Lee.
Yeah.
Oh my, she makes my job so easy. So easy. Like, I just have to listen to her and I can imagine exactly like what she's doing with her hands and her expression. Like, she's a very animated person and just slightly batshit. And yeah, I mean, I have like a whole file just full of Amanda Wynn Lee outtakes where, I mean, she'll just say stuff like, "Oh, go F a monkey." Like, she's fun. Actually, a lot of the voice actresses give me really good stuff to work with. It definitely makes it easier.
If you have my job, you're inundated with bad actresses that think they should be voice actresses, and then you work with someone. For those of you that don't know, Amanda Wynn Lee, she's one of the most famous voice actresses in history. Yeah, she did Yukiko in Persona 4, and she's I never know how to say this. Is it Neon City Evangelion? Is that correct? She's
Evangelion.
Evangelion. She's the main character in that, and she is a complete trip to work with. We also work with Mary Eve Harrington. She plays Amelia, and she's been on the Disney Channel. She's she does all this animated voice, and she is so funny and so sarcastic. Just all of our voice actresses are amazingly talented.
There's been a couple of lines where we're like, yeah, I'm not sure if that's going to work, and like we'll be able to pass it off to them, and they'll nail it.
Yeah, it's
every
really
time.
amazing.
It's really good.
Cool. Well, I don't think I have any other questions. How about you guys? I think it's all so interesting. It's kind of fun.
Yeah, we're really, it's something I take pride in, is the fact that GSK is doing different kind of work than anyone else out there in the industry. There's no shortage of games that are kind of trying to capture this retro 16-bit sprite experience using the, sprite kit tools and Xcode. So, there's no shortage of those kinds of games out there. If you look at Rev 60 and what we're trying to produce, we aren't shipping a game that's a bunch of in-app purchases. We aren't shipping a game that kind of, has you recycling and doing the same thing over and over again. We're really shipping something that, is an emotional experience for the platform with real characters. I mean, my personal theory of why Angry Birds has been successful is that in a sea of games that lack all kinds of personality, Angry Birds at least gave you some colorful characters and an interesting idea and a bit of backstory there. It was just that little hint of emotional connection that you could have to the characters that made it be successful. And, that drives everything we do at Giant Spacekat. Amanda and I, we've animated and worked with our characters and sets for years now. We really care about these characters, and we've done our best to try to inject life into them. And I really hope that when people play our game, they'll be like, I really identify with Amelia. I really identify with Holiday. I hope that it's something especially young girls will play and find a character with their personality type in this game and, see themselves represented in video games.
I think that's part of the reason why a lot of us like the video games is that to some degree we identify with the characters.
Mm-hmm.
And, we identify somewhat with the storyline. Even if its reality is much different from ours. There are usually some themes that run through all of them that we pick up on.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Yeah, that's also kind of the hallmark of a good story. We like watching it because there's something of us in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you can look at something like House of Cards and you could see people are really, they're thirsty for these kinds of complex stories with well-developed characters out there. And, my main criticism of the iOS platform is it's, again, no offense to Apple or my fellow indie developers, but it's generally a very shallow, ephemeral experience. And, we're trying to take the ball and go the complete other direction. And if you play our game, you're going to, play something that is a, 3-hour short, extremely polished emotional experience. You're going to have to make choices in our game that they're going to be difficult for you. I can show you playtester data that shows you're going to have some really heart-wrenching moments if you play our game. And we're eager to kind of bring out that conflict in the player.
Yep. All right. Well, we've been going for about an hour and we usually We usually don't go quite this long, but it's been an interesting conversation. So let's go ahead and get into the picks. Pete, do you want to start us with picks?
Sure. So, 3 picks today. First pick is a fellow indie game thing from a friend of mine, so apologies for the nepotism. It's called Playsets. I actually don't think it's out yet. He just did a Kickstarter, him and his wife and their friend. They just did a Kickstarter for it, and it's for playing Dungeons and Dragons, those kind of like board game RPG type things, but remotely using your iPhone or using your iPad. So it's a really cool idea. Personally, I actually don't have a background of playing those board games, but lots of people who I've showed this to thought it was really cool. So I really like it because it doesn't try to replace all of the stuff that you do in real life. It just kind of facilitates it virtually. And it's kind of cool. And my second pick is kind of random, but it was spurred by a comment someone's made earlier about Apple replacing Objective-C. That reminded me of this awesome podcast that John Siracusa recorded 2 or 3 years ago talking about Copeland 2010. So he did this hypercritical podcast on 5x5, which is awesome.
Every episode of that show is a classic.
Seriously.
And I really do. Yeah, John is here in Massachusetts, and it's my dream that when he's at PAX East this year, that maybe he'll come up and play our game, and I'll completely geek out.
I think you and I share a geek crush on John Siracusa.
Yeah. No, that episode is one of his best. I think the Bridges of Syracuse are another. So.
Yeah. My third pick, inspired by that last comment we just made about kind of immersive characters and also strong female leads, something I'm super passionate about. I don't like how much weird male-dominated stuff there is in our industry and in computing in general. There's this thing called the Hawkeye Initiative.
Yes.
And it's really fun. It's really funny. It's really silly. It's basically kind of fixing the weird gender imbalance in comic books by painting male comic book characters in female comic book character poses.
That is excellent.
You need to see it to believe it. And it's also like really badly done. Like some of them are good, but most of them are people, in like drawing pictures with photo paint or whatever. So you should check it out. It's worth a few minutes of your time. Pretty good stuff. That's it.
I strongly agree with that.
Oh man, this is awesome.
That is amazing.
Yeah, you can lose a whole day there.
So do we get, do the people of GSK, do we get to voice our own picks here?
Yes, you do.
Awesome.
Yeah, I usually call on everyone in turn, but go ahead.
No, I don't mean to. I'm a very passionate person. So
Stop disrupting!
I apologize. No, I actually got we got a tax return this week, so I got my first PS4, and I actually wrote a piece a while back arguing about how, basically the Game of the Year awards for IGN and, GameSpot and Giant Bomb, to me, they lack statistical validity because basically female journalists were not represented there. And I took that argument and really applied it to Tomb Raider, which I felt strongly should have been last year's Game of the Year. I thought it was an amazing game, an amazing story. Brianna Pratchett, basically wrote the script to that, and I thought it was a fantastic experience. And the Tomb Raider team heard I got a PS4, and they actually sent me a copy of their upgraded version of Tomb Raider for PS4 and Xbox One, and it is amazing, especially for me, because I work with materials and texture maps all day long, all the things they basically upgraded for the PS4 version. It's really awesome to see how much better a game it is on PS4 as opposed to PS3. So that would very strongly be one of my picks. I think we've also talked about Apple's kind of challenge with Objective-C for the future. And I think I would strongly recommend this week's Accidental Tech podcast, which has our mutual crush John Siracusa on it. And they're basically talking about some of the issues there and how long it takes to come up with these frameworks and some of the challenges facing Apple there. So I would strongly advocate that. And also I'm playing Bravely Default on the 3DS. Some people have called it the best Final Fantasy game in years. It's not a Final Fantasy game. And I would strongly agree with that. So if you have a 3DS, that game is strongly worth your time.
Sweet. I just picked one up.
Oh, did you? What games do you have for it?
It's one of my picks, so I'll get to that in a minute.
All right. There you go.
All right, Ben, what are your picks?
Okay, thanks.
Great transition.
So yeah, I bought a 3DS. I was like super Nintendo fan Like I was 5 when I got my NES, and then I got SNES, and then a 64, and then I wasn't too excited about the GameCube. I did eventually pick one up, and I was kind of disappointed in the games on the GameCube, and so I didn't get anything after that. And I just it's a perception problem. I think that the DS was just for kids.
Yeah.
And there's so many kids games available for them, and that's clearly their market, but there are some good games I was missing. So I recently was listening to a new podcast on 5x5 Directional Show, and they were just like going through a history of all these Nintendo games that like I had never even played. And there's like 100 Mario games that I haven't even, and I just sort of forgot how good the Nintendo's first party games are. Yeah. So I went to the store and picked up a 3DS and Zelda Link Between Worlds, and I've been playing that, in my copious free time. But it is if you haven't played this one, it's very similar to A Link to the Past, which I feel like I grew up on. That game was so good. This is like the same like initial world, but different storyline, and it's just, I don't know, it's like just scratching an old itch to play those games again, but not necessarily on an emulator. So I will also pick up Bravely Default once I finish this one.
Yeah, I have to say about Link, it really shows how timeless good game design is, because you're playing that game as the exact same game design as, A Link to the Past, the 16-bit, Zelda classic. And you're playing the sequel to that on 3DS. It's an amazing game. I could not recommend it more strongly.
Yeah, the 3D kind of gives me a headache, so most of the time I turn it off.
I do too.
But it was not quite as much as a gimmick as I first thought. If I'm able to sit still, like not like on an airplane or something, or in bed, as long as you're able to hold the 3DS in the right angle, it does look pretty nice, but for short periods of time. My next pick, I was just in Chicago this weekend for CocoConf, and I had an extra day or afternoon to go into Chicago, and I went to the Museum of Science and Industry, just picked it, like, what do I do in Chicago? And holy crap, they have this amazing exhibit of U-505, a captured German U-boat from World War II, where they were able to secure the Enigma code machine. And they have all the stuff on display, including the original sub that was towed back to Bermuda. Anyway, it's amazing exhibit. So if you're heading to Chicago anytime soon, definitely go check that out. I have a beer pick for my trip as well. I got a Southern Tier 2X IPA, which was pretty darn good. And an anti-pick, the TSA, because they dropped my laptop.
Oh.
Yeah. They let the conveyor belt like pile up, and it like all the little plastic bins buckled, and my laptop was in there, and it took a nosedive from about 5 feet in the air.
Oh no.
Or maybe not that high, but it still works, but it's got all kinds of dents on it. And so now I have the great pleasure of dealing with how fast they respond to my claim.
I bet.
So
awesome.
So
yeah, I would be in jail
with the TSA.
right now from them doing that to me if they dropped my laptop. So,
yeah. So down with the TSA, up with Nintendo.
All right, Andrew, what are your picks?
I've just got one pick today, and it's just a new project from Matt Thompson that I found useful this week, and it's called Ono, which is Japanese for axe, and it's an XML. It's sort of yet another XML library for iOS and OS X, but it was useful to me because I've got a project that uses an XML document on OS X, and it's supposed to be a shared code base for iOS, but that doesn't exist on iOS. And anyway, this fills that hole nicely. So that's my pick.
Awesome. Maria, what are your picks?
So I also just recently got a 3DS, and I have one game so far, Super Mario Brothers, or the new Super Mario Brothers 2, because I am a giant fan of the side-scrollers, and pretty much the original DS game I played was the first one of that, so I started that, and so far it's been a lot of fun, especially like Giant Mario. And I don't know if this is out, I think it's just iOS, but The Room 2, which is like a puzzle game, which is really well done. It's pretty short, but it's really polished and really well done.
All right, James, what are your picks?
Hey, I've got one pick, but before I do, Revolution 60 sounds like a pretty sweet game, but I'm thinking the UDK is really more suited to like a Flappy Bird clone. Have you guys thought about that? So if it doesn't work out, I'm just giving that to you guys. So.
Sure. Thanks. That's very valuable advice.
Yeah, nobody's done that yet. We should totally get on that.
So I have one pick. I'm going to do a fish pick. So I spent a week in St. Pete Beach near Tampa, St. Petersburg area, and they got a lot of grouper down there. So I ate quite a bit of grouper. I live in Minnesota, so there's really no reason to order fish off a menu. So unless you catch it, probably not worth it. But the grouper down there is fantastic, and especially one company, Gulf Wild, where you can actually look up the grouper, where it was actually caught and what date. It's kind of like an episode of Portlandia.
I was just thinking.
Except they didn't have the name of the fish. I was kind of disappointed at that. But it sounded like he had a pretty happy life swimming around, but he was delicious.
I
So
will
grouper.
go Minnesota. I'm from Minnesota. I live in Boston now, but I grew up in Minnesota.
Okay.
Wait, aren't there a bunch of lakes there? There must be plenty of fish.
Yeah, well, you catch the fish, If you order from a restaurant, it comes from Canada or something. It just takes time.
Canada.
So.
Canada.
Oh, Canada.
All right, Amanda, what are your picks?
Oh, God, don't ask me. Honestly, my life has been Rev 60 and my 2-year-old, so unless you want to hear about toddler apps.
Yes.
Go for it.
Yeah?
Yes.
All right, the best toddler apps that I've picked up. Peekaboo Toy Box and Peekaboo Barn. It's been really kind of fun watching my daughter pick up and, by the way, be able to unlock my iPad, find the Netflix app, and open up Curious George all on her own.
It is amazing how kids can do that.
Holy crap. It's frightening. I'm simultaneously proud and terrified. And I'm like,
Yep.
You know what, kid? You earned that TV time. So, yeah, those toddler apps would be my pick.
Amanda, can you talk a bit about your Project X that we're talking about at GSK? Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. I mean, honestly, once the game's out, we're going to have some downtime. And in watching my daughter play with the various apps that are out there, they're good, but there's just so much more that they could do. And there are a couple of foibles that happen where if the parent's nearby, they're going to get annoyed really quick. So we're talking about, it's very high level still, but we're talking about doing our own kind of toddler app using one of our characters, a younger version of her, and kind of having a girls can be scientists slant to it, but keeping it fairly simple and using the pipeline that we already have in place. And we're really excited about it.
Yeah.
That's an awesome idea.
Yeah, if you look at I'm a non-parent, but I've also been playing a lot of toddler apps this week, kind of surveying the landscape for it, and I think when I watch Amanda's daughter respond to 3D animation, and my other friends, with children, respond viscerally to seeing 3D animation on screen, which I believe is very immersive, and then we looked at the landscape, which is a lot of basically 2D apps made with SpriteKit, and we think there's a place and a market out there for something basically done in 3D that's more immersive with beautiful lifelike animation of the characters. So we're going to see if we can put something like that together.
Cool. I love how when you talk about playing games, it sounds like market research. You can pay me to do your market research whenever you want.
If you have my job, you can actually deduct games on your taxes because it's legitimately market research.
Wow.
I will pick up an Unreal game and study the way we've implemented materials and textures and static meshes and skeletal meshes and turn right around and sometimes contact the developers and find out how they've done that. So that's one of the advantages to my job.
The last 5 apps I've purchased, I've been like, woohoo, tax write-off.
Yeah, I do that. I do that sometimes too, depending on what it is and if I have any interest in writing an app like that. All right. Well, I guess it's my turn to give out some picks. This week I got into some calendaring apps, and I picked this up off of Mac Power Users podcast, so I better pick them too. But the 2 apps that I picked up that I'm really liking are BusyCal. And the thing I like about BusyCal is that I can kind of customize it to the view that I want. I usually use, or I have been using Google Calendar before, and this just imports it and sets it up nicely. It also puts the weather forecast at the top of the day so I can see, okay, today is overcast and rainy, tomorrow should be sunny, Thursday should be nice, Friday, partly cloudy, and it gives the forecasted high and low and things like that. So I really, really like it. So I'm going to pick that. And then the other one is Fantastical. And the thing I like about Fantastical is that it provides a place where you can actually go in and enter things into your calendar. But instead of going and clicking on each field and saying, I have this event at this time, and so you have to fill in all those different fields. You can just type it in, meet with James Zuber at 10 a.m. Central Time on Skype, and it'll just fill in all the fields correctly.
That's cool.
And put it on my calendar. And so I can't say enough good things about that because I love it. I don't have to think about, okay, click. I just open that up and I'm off to the races. So I'm going to pick those. And finally, I'm going to do a little bit of shameless self-promotion. I am primarily a back-end developer. So if you need some kind of smart back-end on your system, an API implemented with REST or whatever, I can do that. I've also done some Apple push notification services work. And so if you need any of that done, feel free to give me a call or an email. My email is chuck@devchat.tv, and I'll be happy to take care of that for you. And with that, I guess we'll wrap up. We do have a book club book. It is Functional
Reactive Programming.
I need to write that down. Functional Reactive
by
Programming.
Ashfurrow.
Yep. So go pick up the book. We'll have a link in the show notes, and we'll catch y'all next week.